You think luxury is just an expensive house? Then get ready to see mansions that make palaces look like modest summer cottages. These are homes that were given as wedding gifts, had hundreds of millions of dollars spent on them, and were maintained like private empires with an army of staff. But the craziest thing is that many of these giants ultimately destroyed even their fabulously wealthy owners. And the closer we get to the #1 spot, the more it will seem to you that this is not America, but a separate universe for the super rich. Welcome to the channel for the wealthiest.
Luxury life.
Harbor Hill. Harbor Hill is not just a beautiful name from the old money era, but one of the brightest symbols of luxurious America at the beginning of the 20th century. This mansion is often associated with the atmosphere of The Great Gatsby, and not without reason. It had both fabulous fortunes and loud parties, and that very glitter behind which a crack was always hiding. The house became a wedding gift for Clarence Mackay and his wife Kitty. This fact alone says everything about the scale of the family. Clarence's father, John William Mackay, made his fortune on the gold and silver of Nevada. In modern figures, his capital would be estimated at around $2.5 billion. And when the time came to truly impress the newlyweds, he gifted not jewelry and not a yacht, but a giant estate. Harbor Hill spread over 648 acres of land on Long Island. The house was designed by Stanford White, one of the leading architects of his era. Construction took 3 years. Inside, there were 52 rooms, and all this magnificence was serviced by 126 servants. This is one of the best indicators of the real level of luxury. When an entire army of staff works for one private house, it is no longer about comfort, but about a private empire. The interiors were created to overwhelm with scale. Oak panels, carved staircases, huge fireplaces, halls flooded with light, French furniture, antiques, art collections, heavy doors, floors with an expressive pattern. Every element communicated the same thing to guests. Money is not just present here, it is demonstratively materialized in everything around. Harbor Hill hosted very influential guests through luxurious evenings, and the very atmosphere of the house perfectly conveyed the mood of the Gilded Age, wealth that seemed to know no ceiling. But like many houses on this list, the mansion did not survive the reality when the parties were over. Personal dramas, financial blows, and the crash of 1929 gradually destroyed this world. This is a very indicative start. Already, the 10th place is a gift house worth the dream of several generations. But further on, the scales will become even larger. Meadowbrook Hall. In 9th place is Meadowbrook Hall, one of the most imposing houses built with the money of industrial America. This residence belonged to Matilda Dodge Wilson, the heiress to the enormous fortune of the Dodge family, and her husband Alfred Wilson. Before us is not the old aristocracy of Europe, but the new American elite, who earned their millions in industry and wanted to live no worse than dukes and princes. Meadowbrook Hall was built from 1926 to 1929. The house had 110 rooms, and the total area exceeded 88,000 square feet. For an ordinary person, this is already difficult to translate into familiar scales. This is not a big house. This is a space where each part seems to exist by the laws of a separate world. The special power of Meadowbrook Hall is that it does not try to scream about wealth directly. Here, luxury works differently. It is felt in the volume, in the details, in the quality of execution, in the very confidence of this house. Wealth here is presented not as a flash, but as stable power. Not as an attempt to amaze everyone for a minute, but as a calm statement. We can afford to build a 110-room residence and do it at the highest level. This is the language of big industrial money. When fortunes were so huge that instead of another purchase, historical giant houses appeared that outlived their owners. And there is an important point here. Meadowbrook Hall survived. Today, it is not a vanished legend, but a real house museum, where you can come and see with your own eyes how far luxury could go in America in the first half of the 20th century. But if wealth here still looks collected and controlled, the next house shows how luxury can cross a line and turn into a financial trap. Shadow Lawn. Shadow Lawn in New Jersey is luxury without breaks. A huge, spectacular, deliberately grand house built at a moment when wealthy America did not yet feel the approach of catastrophe. This is a mansion where it is already clear from the facade. No expense was spared here on anything. It was built in 1927 for Hubert Temple Parson, the president of the F.W. Woolworth Company. The cost of the project exceeded $10 million. Even today, such a figure sounds provocative. For its time, it was an almost shocking level of spending, money that no longer purchased housing but transformed into a grandiose public gesture. The width of the house exceeded 300 feet, and inside there were more than 100 luxuriously decorated rooms. The main hall, the organ, the interior courtyard about 100 feet long under a glass roof, columns, sculptures, heavy classical architecture. Everything here was designed for effect. And one of the most vivid details is its own bowling alley in the basement. Such things especially well show the difference between a simply rich life and that luxury where a private house begins to absorb the functions of a club, a hotel, and a palace simultaneously. But the story of Shadowlawn is valuable not only for its scale, but also for its finale. The Great Depression changed everything. What just yesterday looked like a normal standard of living for a super rich person became an unbearable burden. The maintenance of the huge residence turned into a problem that even big money could not solve. As a result, the house, into which millions were poured, went for an almost symbolic price: $100. This is one of the harshest contrasts in the entire list. First, a house that cost a fortune. Then, a sum for which today you cannot even buy a single piece of furniture from a luxury interior. And therein lies the whole essence of luxury at the limit. The higher the rise, the louder the fall can be. Winterthur. Winterthur is no longer just a huge private home, but luxury turned into a cultural project of national scale. Its owner was Henry Francis DuPont, a man with a colossal fortune and no less large ambitions. Only, unlike many other rich men of his time, he decided to build not just a giant residence, but a personal museum of America. Initially, a relatively modest house of 12 rooms stood on this spot. Then it was expanded to 30, but when Henry DuPont inherited the fortune, the project began to grow truly. Ultimately, Winterthur expanded to 175 rooms and became one of the largest private homes in the country. All of this was situated on a territory of about 2,500 acres, but the size here is only half the story. The main point is different. DuPont did not just fill the rooms with expensive things. He literally collected the American past from all over the country. He purchased antique panels, furniture, architectural details, decorative elements, wallpaper, doors, household items, and entire interiors. In Winterthur, luxury ceased to be simply a demonstration of money and turned into a way to own history. Inside, one could see spaces decorated in the spirit of different eras of early America: rare 18th century wallpapers, restored historical rooms, and collections that most museums would not have had the budget for. The library is particularly impressive, about 87,000 books and approximately 500,000 manuscripts. This is no longer the level of a house, it is the level of an institute, an archive, a cultural center. Winterthur has a depth that is rare for such objects. It is not just a place where the owner lived richly, it is a place where the owner, for enormous money, assembled his own version of national memory. And perhaps that is exactly why the house survived time, not as a ruin, and not as a rich man's demolished caprice, but as an important museum. After such a house, it is especially interesting to return to another side of luxury, a much tougher and more egocentric one, to where the size of a house was a matter not of taste, but of status in a direct struggle with neighbors. The mansion of Cornelius Vanderbilt II. At the end of the 19th century, Fifth Avenue was an arena where the wealthiest families of America competed not in modesty, but in the size of their own palaces. And Cornelius Vanderbilt II played big in this race. At first, he already had an impressive house built in 1883, but very quickly it turned out that impressive was not enough. Neighbors were building bigger and more luxurious, and Vanderbilt decided not to yield. He bought up houses on his block, ordered their demolition, and expanded his own residence so that it occupied an entire city block. The result was almost incredible for Manhattan. About 125,000 square feet of area, 130 rooms, 6 floors above ground and additional levels below ground. This was no longer a mansion, but a city palace. Halls, staircases, gilding, heavy decorative brilliance, everything here worked towards one task: to emphasize that the owner belonged to the top of the financial pyramid of his time. Such houses were built not for coziness and not for family quiet. They were an architectural form of ego. In the world of old money, the house was supposed to speak for the owner even before he appeared in the room, and the Vanderbilt Mansion handled this task flawlessly. But even such palaces were not eternal. After the death of Cornelius, the house passed to his wife Alice. Formally, there were enough funds for maintenance, but New York was changing rapidly. The era of private palaces on Fifth Avenue was gradually giving way to a new vertical luxury: skyscrapers. In 1926, the house was sold for $7 million, which today is equivalent to approximately $120 million, and yet this did not save it from demolition. Before the destruction, the public was allowed inside, and many elements of the interior were essentially dismantled and carried away. Today, from one of the largest houses in the history of Manhattan, only the gates at the entrance to Central Park remain, a very precise finale for a whole era. From a giant demonstration of wealth, only a fragment remains, into which the memory of vanished luxury is now built. The house had 147 rooms. It rose 6 levels, including hidden spaces underground and under the roof. Arden House. Arden House shows another facet of wealth, not urban, but land-based. This is a home behind which stood the railroad empire of Edward Henry Harriman, and when it comes to his possessions, ordinary ideas about country luxury simply stop working. By the beginning of the 20th century, the Harriman family owned approximately 40,000 acres of land in this area, and about half of this territory consisted of the Arden Estate itself. What is especially important here is not only the building, but the feeling of scale around it. When a person owns not just a house and a park, but a huge piece of landscape, wealth begins to be perceived as control over space. Construction of the house began in 1905. The project was handled by the famous firm Carrere and Hastings. The residence stood on a hill and literally dominated the surroundings. In such houses, luxury is not only marble and furniture, it is also the views, the driveways, the relief, the silence, the air, and the feeling that everything around belongs to one family. Arden House is a very precise image of old money. No fuss, no attempt to please everyone, only power expressed in land, architecture, and calm confidence. But there is a bitterness to this story. Harriman spent many years planning the estate, but managed to live in it for only a very short time. The house one can dream about for decades turned out to be a luxury that the owner hardly had time to enjoy. Today, Arden House operates as a conference center, and this transformation well shows the fate of many giant residences. They either become museums or adapt to a new reality. But the next mansion was so expensive that even against this background, it looks almost provocative. White Marsh Hall. White Marsh Hall is one of the most expensive and spectacular homes in the history of American luxury. It was built for financier Edward Stotesbury and his wife Eva, and here everything starts with a figure that instantly sets the right tone. Approximately $10 million were spent on construction. In modern money, this is about $300 million. $300 million for one house, and that is just the construction. Without all the further expenses, antiques, works of art, staff, and the infinite cost of maintenance, this alone is enough to understand. White Marsh Hall was created not as housing, but as a private monument to financial might. The house had 147 rooms. It rose 6 levels, including hidden spaces underground and under the roof. The ceilings on the main floor reached approximately 25 feet. The facades were clad in limestone, and the house itself stood on top of a hill, as if emphasizing its superiority over the surrounding world. Inside, everything associated with the maximum luxury of the old school. A ballroom about 64 feet long, capable of hosting up to 800 guests. Its own movie theater, a barber shop, a bakery, a gym, a wine cellar. This is the type of house where wealth ceases to be a beautiful interior and turns into an autonomous system. The higher the level, the fewer reasons to ever leave the boundaries of one's own world. But the main thing is the maintenance cost. Keeping up White Marsh Hall consumed over $1 million a year. For most people, this is a sum capable of providing absolute freedom for many years. Here, it simply burned up on the upkeep of the house, on staff, the care of the space, technical needs, receptions, keeping the luxurious life in working condition. When the Great Depression came, even such fortunes turned out not to be infinite. The mistress sold off jewelry, antiques, and works of art, but the house continued to drag down. Eventually, it was sold, then changed owners, and later was demolished. The One. The One in Bel Air represents a different language of wealth. If the old houses on our list were built for family name, receptions, and social status, then the One is the luxury of the digital age, designed also for spectacle. Such a house must not simply exist, it must become viral, discussed, recognizable from the first frame. The area of the One exceeds 105,000 square feet. This is a huge modern mega compound, which in feeling is closer not to a house, but to a personal 5-star resort. Everything here is subordinated to effect. Panoramic views, scales, light, smooth lines. A space where the architecture itself seems created for filming, drones, and videos collecting millions of views. In old mansions, luxury was often expressed through heavy interiors, antiques, marble, columns, and an atmosphere of family power. The One acts differently. It is wealth without nostalgia. Wealth that wants to be modern, impeccably polished, and maximally spectacular. There is no desire to remind of the past here. There is a desire to show the present, and to show it in such a way that the viewer immediately understands. This is a level that seems almost extraterrestrial. The One well reflects the logic of new wealth. The house must be not only a place of life, but also a symbol of success, a brand, a media object. Not just a residence, but a space that itself becomes content. And in this sense, it fits perfectly into the 21st century, where luxury is evaluated not only by price, but also by the ability to impress on a screen. But for all its modernity and scale, the One still yields to the next house in historical aura and drama of origin, because ahead of us awaits a real castle. Oheka Castle. Oheka Castle is one of the most impressive homes ever built in the United States, and perhaps one of the strongest examples of how personal ambition turns into an architectural legend. This huge castle was erected by financier Otto Kahn, a man incredibly wealthy, influential, and not ready to accept that doors were closed in front of him somewhere. Kahn faced discrimination. Jews were not admitted to some elite clubs and closed communities. His answer was brilliantly expensive. If you are not wanted in someone else's world, you can build your own, even more luxurious, even more spectacular, and one where others will already come with admiration. After Kahn's previous country house nearly perished in a fire, he wanted a new residence maximally protected from such a threat. Oheka Castle was built of steel and concrete, turning it into one of the first fully fireproof private houses of such a scale. Already here, the owner's signature is felt, not just to make it beautiful, but to make the house an almost impregnable symbol of strength. An artificial hill was created for the castle to open up panoramic views. The entire estate occupied 443 acres. On the territory were gardens, water terraces, an 18-hole golf course, a huge greenhouse complex, tennis courts, an indoor pool, a landing strip, gardens, and stables. This is no longer simply life in luxury. This is life in a space that absorbs a whole set of privileges and turns them into everyday reality. Oheka Castle impresses not only with its size, but with its character. There is stubbornness, energy, and almost demonstrative power in it. This is the house of a man who decided not to ask for access to the elite, but to create an object next to which the elite itself looks like an invited guest. The castle survived changes of owners and eras, but still remains one of the most impressive symbols of American wealth. And yet there is a house that, even against this background, stands higher. Not only in scale, but in the absoluteness of its legend. Biltmore Estate is the pinnacle of American luxury, the largest house ever built in the United States, and one of those objects next to which any talk of big mansions has to be started anew. Because Biltmore is already not just a house, it is a whole philosophy of wealth brought to a monumental scale. Behind the project was George Washington Vanderbilt, a representative of one of the richest families in America. For his residence, he purchased about 195 square miles of land near Asheville. The very scale of the purchase already says a lot. Here they were not buying a plot and not an estate. Here they were essentially buying their own geography. The landscapes were handled by Frederick Law Olmsted, one of the most outstanding masters of his time. His task consisted not only of shaping the gardens and views, but also of creating a self-sufficient domain with farms, husbandries, and a carefully thought-out natural environment. After this, Richard Morris Hunt was brought into work, and a house appeared that still remains beyond competition. The area of Biltmore exceeds 178,000 square feet. Inside, 250 rooms, 35 bedrooms, and 43 bathrooms. These figures already sound like a description not of a residential house, but of a palace complex. Construction continued for 6 years, and more than 1,000 people labored on the site daily. Stone was delivered via a private railway. This is one of the brightest signs of real financial scale. When a separate supply system has to be built just for your house. The interiors of Biltmore emphasize the absolute breadth of the project. The main hall, the winter garden, the library with more than 10,000 books, the salon with European antiques, the banquet hall about 72 feet long with ceilings approximately 70 feet high, the giant table for 64 guests, the triple fireplace, and the built-in organ. Here, every detail worked towards one goal, to show that the owner of the house thinks in another category of reality, where luxury is meant not to supplement life, but to define its scale. Even the spaces on the lower floors were impressive. A swimming pool, a bowling alley, a gymnasium with the best equipment of the late 19th century. The house combined the grandeur of a palace, the comfort of an elite club, and the autonomy of a private world where almost everything necessary was already located within the domain. The most astonishing thing about Biltmore is that it did not disappear and did not turn into a legend preserved only in photographs. The estate still exists, remains in the ownership of the descendants of the Vanderbilts, and continues to receive an enormous number of visitors. It is not a ruin, not a shadow of the past, but the living peak of that era when American fortunes were so great that people literally built history out of them. That is precisely why Biltmore is the undoubted #1. Not just because of its size, but because everything came together in it. Land, money, architecture, engineering, ambition, beauty, and the almost painful striving to create something so grandiose that it would outlive its owner and become a legend by itself. Write in the comments which of these houses impressed you the most, and subscribe to the channel for the wealthiest here about luxury, wealth, and the life of the most influential people on the planet. Thank you for watching, and right now watch our previous luxurious episodes which have already appeared on your screen.